So I've been driving around in this Kia Pro Cee'd GT for the last week or so, and what I find quite interesting is the difference between this and some of the old Kias. So 5-6 years ago, the biggest selling point for a brand new Kia was that you could walk into a dealership and you could buy one for £1. So you could just walk in straight up and buy a Kia Picanto brand new. It's the cheapest car on sale in the UK. And now today, all of a sudden Kias have just stepped up their game and they're making some really interesting cars. The main one is this, it's the Pro Cee'd GT, and it's Kia's first chance really to build anything like a hot hatch. It's got a 1.6 litre turbocharged engine with 201 brake horsepower, so 0 to 60 is 7.3 seconds. That isn't fast. 7.3 seconds isn't fast. It's okay, but it's not what you'd expect nowadays from a hot hatch. But Kia doesn't really want this to be a proper hot hatch. I think it's more just their first try at making something that's a little bit faster. So it's quicker than the normal cars, but it's still not up to something like a 208 GTI or something like that. It's interesting because it's turbocharged, the way the power comes in makes it feel faster than it is. So around about 2000 RPM, you get a great big kick of torque, which makes it feel faster than you're actually going because it just comes in one lump. Peak power's at about 6000 RPM, which I think is too high because the red line is at 6,500, and by the time you get to 6, you feel like you need to change gear. It feels like it's struggling a little bit because you haven't got that torque anymore. The engine makes quite a good noise. I've been surprised. I think a lot of it is down to the exhaust because from the outside at least, it sounds really good, and you can hear it from, I don't know, like a quarter of a mile away. Which is weird. For a turbocharged Kia, you can hear a quarter of a mile away. It's quite funny. And inside the car as well, the speakers pump through noise into the cabin to give it a more sporty sound. It doesn't do it all the time, but there's a button on the steering wheel called GT, and aside from giving you a little turbo kind of boost gauge and a torque kind of gauge as well, it pumps more sound through the speakers. I don't know whether you'll be able to hear it, but I'll give it a go anyway. So this is normal. Yeah, you can't hear that, but trust me, it does make more noise when you press that button. To drive, it's quite good fun actually. The steering, I think, is perhaps the biggest letdown because it's very vague. It's quite light, well, it's very light actually at kind of manoeuvring speeds when you're sort of doing 10 miles an hour or something like that. And then the faster you go, the heavier it gets, but it gets unnaturally heavy and it changes quite a lot. So if it's a certain weight as you're heading towards a corner and then you brake and turn for the corner, the steering gets heavier and it just doesn't feel very natural. It feels like the car is trying to simulate what the tyres are doing rather than actually telling me what the tyres are doing. So I think if Kia wants to keep going with hot hatches and get better at it, that's one thing they really need to work on, is just the steering weight and how it kind of gives you the information about the front tyres. The brakes are good. I've got no complaints about the brakes. I think the pedals are quite difficult to feel what's going on, but the brakes are very, very strong. They're pretty big actually, and they've got red brake calipers. So red brake calipers on a yellow Kia, it certainly draws people's attention. The suspension is very firm, but I rather like that, I have to say, because it makes it feel like you're in a fast car. I think it's a good distinguishing point between a normal Kia and a Pro Cee'd GT. You get in it and immediately the suspension feels firm. It's not uncomfortable, it's not like it's throwing me out of my seat all the time, but it reminds you that you're in something that's slightly different than normal. Inside the cabin, it's quite good actually. Everything's logically laid out. There are buttons in here that make so much sense. Like there's a button just for turning this sat-nav screen off at night time, which makes such a difference because so many cars don't have it and you're just blinded by this sat-nav screen, whereas this, just press a button and it goes away. You've got 5 seats, back seats are really comfy, the front seats are Recaros and they are really good. Like they push your shoulder blades forward slightly and it just keeps your back nicely bent, and they're really supportive. One thing that I think Kia should work on for the next time is the quality. A lot of things in here are okay, but standout thing for me is I look at the indicator stalks and they are a shiny, black, nasty plastic that does not belong in here. It's just a bit of a letdown, like everything else is quite well put together, and yet you've got these black, they're just shiny and they look completely different to everything else in the cabin. It doesn't really make sense. Why not just make them out of the same plastic that's in here everywhere else? So you can get a Pro Cee'd GT for 23 and a 5-door Cee'd GT for 22. I really like this car. I think as a first attempt from Kia, it's a top effort, and it's miles away from the Kias that we were seeing sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago, so it's good. There are a few things that Kia can do for next time, but on the most part, it's a really good effort.